Welcome to another episode of School Safety Talks. My name is Dev Fragachan, your host, and today we have the pleasure and the privilege to have a great friend and a true innovator in Florida and probably in the United States. We have here Gus Xhudo. Mr. Xhudo, thank you very much for being here. He's a good friend of mine, personal friend, and he trailblazed security for schools in Florida. He's in many commissions, and his bio is so big that I gotta let him say it because I won't, in my paper, it won't fit here. So, Gus, it's all yours, brother.
Thank you for having me, Zeph. I appreciate it. So, as you mentioned, my name is Gus Xhudo. Currently, I'm the Director of Security for Charter Schools USA. The company is based in Florida, and we have approximately about 65 schools in Florida spread across 17 school districts from north all the way to south, another 30 schools in Louisiana, North Carolina, South Carolina. Briefly about my background, I actually started out working as an analyst for the federal government many years ago. Received my doctorate from the University of St. Andrews, Center for Terrorism and Political Violence. This was back in the early 90s. And then went back to Washington, worked for the government, became a special agent, went to the academy, and started out my career with the Diplomatic Security Service, U.S. State Department. So served a couple tours overseas in Nigeria and Portugal, covering embassy security. And part of the embassy security included American international schools. So we were doing State Department was doing school safety overseas and protecting diplomats' kids and so forth, and doing surveys and vulnerability assessments and so forth. I transferred after 12 years to Homeland Security and went to New York and finished up my career there. My last 7 years, I was assigned to the Terrorist Interdiction Unit with NYPD intelligence. So we were working closely with NYPD detectives on mostly terrorism finance cases, still conducting surveys where necessary and so forth. And then I retired in 2019 and took this job with CLPS Consultants. And CLPS Consultants is the primary security vendor for Charter Schools USA. And as part of my duties, I basically cover the security director role for Charter Schools USA. And I've been doing that for the past 5 years.
And what is your role with the MSD Commission?
Well, the MSD Commission, at the start of the 22-23 school year, the MSD Commission convened a subcommittee. And basically the role of that subcommittee was to create a new threat assessment model for the state of Florida. After the Parkland tragedy of approximately 7 years ago, Florida basically went from worst to first in the country in terms of school safety and security. And they mandated threat assessment teams for every single school in the state of Florida. They were following the comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines developed by Dr. Cornell at University of Virginia when they first started, the CSTAC model for short. The MSD Commission saw some shortcomings with the model, and so they convened the subcommittee, headed up by the chair of the committee, and brought in about a dozen experts in the 4 areas of a threat assessment. So instruction, law enforcement, mental health, and administration. So we had several superintendents and mental health coordinators, chiefs of police, and so forth. And the commission decided that they wanted to bring in an outside voice to get a charter school's perspective, because they realized these were all district people and public school, public servants, and so forth. So they asked me to sit on the commission, and we spent the next 8 months creating the new harm prevention threat management model that is now currently standardized in the state of Florida. It took over the CSTAC model. So we helped create that model, pass legislation through the MSD committee, and now it's basically being rolled out about a dozen other states that were either in the process of passing threat assessment legislation or have recently passed threat assessment legislation, sent representatives to Tallahassee because they wanted to adopt this model. And so what I did, being on the committee, was I've already kind of adapted it for use outside of the state of Florida and have been training it out to other entities that we're partnered with, we meaning CLPS. So for example, the New York State Sheriff's Association, we're training out a bunch of sheriff's deputies and others who are looking to adopt this model for use in their states and their schools. So that's been my role. And then a year afterwards, the Department of Education for the state of Florida, the Office of Safe Schools, convened a working group, again, part of the MSD committee, to go over evacuation and reunification policies and procedures. Currently, the accepted model is the standard reunification method that has been created by the I Love You Guys Foundation in conjunction with the Department of Homeland Security, my old agency. And Florida wanted to convene school safety specialists, and again, I was invited to that to help create some standard policies that are now on the Department of Education's website for schools to adopt for their evacuation and reunification procedures. So that's been sort of what I've been doing in the last 3 years as part of my role in the security director position, is coordinating with the Department of Education and Office of Safe Schools on some of these subcommittees that are specifically designed towards school safety.
It's quite impressive.
I'm sorry if I went lengthy.
No, but it's necessary, and I tell you because what you do is have a great impact in what we do. I wanna share something, and it's that since this legislation was passed in Florida, since we have guardians in schools, since we have the coordination between law enforcement, Department of Education, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, we haven't had a single tragedy in the past 7 years, and it's, in my opinion, a big part because of that. What do you think about it?
I would agree, and I think that the other component of that is within the MSD Act is the Aaron Feist component of it. Correct. Because I believe that is what really has bolstered security at schools, because it's just a matter of simple logistics. Despite all the various sheriff's offices, and many of them are, as you're aware, some of them are much more proactive than others, but a lot of it is based on funding and so forth and what their availability of resources are. And while some sheriff's offices are very proactive in supplying SROs, it's the SSO component that becomes more important, because those are the people that engage in much more coverage. And I just see that myself with Charter Schools USA. From year 1 to now year 5, I've seen an exponential increase in the coverage of SSOs through your company for our schools, going from a handful of schools to where now 2/3 of our schools are covered by SSOs, by dynamic integrated security. So, and during that time, we've seen preventative steps and proactive measures as opposed to just reaction. And I think that goes a long way towards the SSO component piece throughout the state of Florida. And I think that's something that, is just increasing.
And I appreciate those words, and I got to tell you that we here in Dynamic Integrated Security, we put a big effort in that, in coordinating, I think, information and the sharing of information, the partnership. It is so important and goes so long. Now, let me ask you, because this is a question that we receive, and I want to pass it to you. What is, in your opinion, what you want to see, in your opinion, in the position that you be as an expert in the matter? What you want to see modify in the law in Florida to obviously getting 100% security, getting infallible is utopic.
Right.
However, we all have to aim higher.
Right.
Why you want to see changes in the legislature in Florida to make our schools safe?
Well, I think if we're looking at it, if we're looking at it from a micro level, meaning statewide, just Florida, and then expand it outward, I think standardization is key. Because the way we currently see the situation with the Aaron Feist program and everything else is that everything is kind of stovepiped within individual districts. And then every individual district in Florida has its own mechanisms and policies, and sometimes those conflict with actual state statute or state administrative code.
Right.
And then within the districts, you have even further stovepiping, where you have school district police doing one thing, and then you have sheriff's offices doing another, and then you have the actual school district or the administrators that are doing something else. So there is very little standardization. So, for example, under the Guardian program or a school safety officer program, is a sheriff's office will manage it. So a sheriff's office in one district they all have to mandate the minimum number of whatever it is, 144 hours of training. But some districts will say, well, we have an additional 40. Some say, well, we have an additional 20.
Correct.
But they don't standardize that process. So what happens is you have one sheriff's office that'll say, this is what we require.
We have sheriffs with 200 hours.
Right. And then we have some sheriff's offices say, okay, we're going to train you, and we're going to give you our training, and you're going to be mandated under the state minimum, which is 144. However, then what happens is you may have a sheriff's office now implements policies and procedures to say those individuals can only operate within this county. or at these county schools, or we won't allow you to take that certification to another district. And now you have to engage an entire process all over again when it should be standardized. So think of it from the perspective of, say, federal law enforcement, right? Federal law enforcement, regardless of what agency you're with, everyone has to be, at a minimum, a federal criminal investigator, Title 18, and 1811. So they go to FLETC, right? They go to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. They have to do the bare minimum of whatever it is, 3 months worth of training. Then they go to their individual agencies, Secret Service, DSS, ATF, whatever, all right? And then they will do their add-on training specific to that particular agency. And that's fine. But I think what we need to do here is to standardize it where it's all brought in under one umbrella. For example, FDLE, right, should manage a program where you have a standardized training. And then if individual sheriff's offices want to do that specific add-on training for themselves, they can do that because they're saying, well, we have certain needs and certain circumstances in our particular county that we would like add-on training for. But there's no reason that you can't have a statewide entity manage the entire training program, create regional centers for training, and then essentially basically take that training and have someone who is trained. Because if I have an SSO who is trained in Miami-Dade County, there's no reason that person the next day, if something happens,
can't go to Jacksonville.
Can't go to Jacksonville and go show up at a school and cover that school. Because it's all about the minimum standardization process. And that's what I feel they're lacking here in Florida. And then expand that outward, where ideally what you would like to have is a situation where you have a federal oversight and have, similar to FLETC, where you have an entire standardization SSO program that the federal government can administer, background checks, everything, and do everything state, like federally, and then you can have somebody who is trained on what the bare minimum standards are, so that if somebody's an SSO in Virginia and they just, their family uproots and moves to Southern California, they can go cover the school the next day as long as they have certification.
I echo the same thing than you are saying, and one of the things that we are looking for is to push for a federal mandate.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason. One of the recent interviews that we do, and we discussed this in the program before. Statistically, a school shooting lasts about 8 minutes. Statistically,
sure,
every 8 seconds somebody gets shot. The response from the police in the United States is average between 8 to 10 minutes. So statistically speaking, we're talking about the police is going to arrive when everything is done. And we have studies about that. Now, running a school, running an education facility without having somebody that is trained and certified to face this issue should be criminal.
Oh, yeah.
It's honestly criminal.
It's certainly negligent. Right.
Very
I mean, it's and the training that I provide when I do the threat assessment training, I always tell people, understand that yes, it's good to have an SSO or SRO at your school, but don't get lulled into a false sense of security, because there are other functions that they need to do other than mitigate that potential. Because, as you said, response time is key. And the example I use, think about the Oxford, Michigan shooting from a few years ago. All right.
Correct.
From the first 911 call to police response, it was 182 seconds. All right, so 3 minutes. And yet in 3 minutes, you still had 4 to 5 casualties. All right. So even the best response time, it's not a question of prevention at that point. It becomes mitigation.
Correct.
So when we're looking at it from a perspective of an SSO or an SRO that's on campus, there's a lot of other factors that go into play there.
Absolutely.
And they have to do a whole slew of items, right? They have to do everything. But I just feel like, as you said, you want to be able to have at the bare minimum the necessary coverage provided, because failure to do so engages in a liability and engages, as you said, in criminal negligence. The Oxford, Michigan case is a perfect example. Those two parents are currently in jail for criminal negligence because they should have known that their child was going to do something, and they helped foster that sort of radicalization of that child.
We have this case that just happened in North Carolina where this kid was posting pictures with him with guns and everything else. And when they interviewed the mom said, "We don't have any guns.
Right.
We don't have any guns. We don't have any guns. Maybe my boyfriend."
Yeah.
Long story short, the kids found the gun that same day in the parking lot of the school on her mom's car, and commit suicide with the same gun.
Now,
the gun that she says she doesn't have.
Now, that was a tragedy, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this. I actually was there at that.
No, I'm aware.
Yeah, so I was there 1 hour after that happened, and yes, and that's a perfect. Now, as tragic as that was, it could have been a lot worse. That kid could have taken that gun
And
running
gone
back
somebody
inside
else
the
inside the
school.
school.
Yes. So it was a tragedy, and again, and the school in that instance, this is the other thing in the after action that we looked at, and that the school did everything properly. They put the school into a soft lockdown. Everybody was in classrooms, locked in. The front office was engaged in doing this. You had an SRO and a marked unit on spot interviewing the mom, searching the child, searching his backpack, searching the locker. Everything was done properly, and you still had
a tragic outcome.
tragic accident. Yeah.
But it was, and this is the thing, because I keep saying this, some of the shooters already make the decision.
Yeah.
They already make the decision. The game here now is how to prevent and minimize the casualties. Because obviously, if we can make sure that he do not bring that rampage inside the school, we're winning.
Right, yes. And part of that, I think, is the preventative measures that go even further back to the whole idea of the threat assessment itself, right? Because threat assessment is an important key. And that's one of the reasons why Florida realized that the current model they were using, the CSTAC model, had some shortcomings. Listen, there's no such thing as a perfect model or solution. Security is never 100%.
Absolutely.
Because you can have every measure imaginable, and you can still have human error that results in a tragedy.
Not only that, you can
Right.
have the bad people
Yes.
figure it out how to beat
We're
the
going to
system.
figure out how to circumvent it.
Absolutely.
Exactly. So when we're looking at it from that perspective, that's why I feel threat assessment is important. And that is also a reason why I think the threat assessment process, and when you asked the previous question about what else, what would I like to see, is having that process pushed out, not just to the people in the school that are part of the school administration and so forth. And, you're looking at SSOs that need to be involved in this process as
Absolutely.
well. Outside vendors such as your company, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're covering a school, right? Well, if you have a school security officer that's at a particular school and the school is conducting a threat assessment on a particular student of concern, under the current system, they're not allowed to share that information
Correct. With
with the SSO
Correct.
on a student of concern because of FERPA.
But I
right?
suppose by statute, then I have to face that threat. I have to be prepared
Right.
for that threat.
And so that's one of the reasons why I always tell schools, I say, listen, we understand that under the statute, a school security officer does not qualify as sworn law enforcement for purposes of the statute. But there's nothing preventing you from bringing that person in, making sure they receive the training so that at the very least they are certified, and now you can share information with them on particular, hey, you should be aware of this student.
This kid.
Right. So you have the information without violating the Privacy Act,
Absolutely.
which is FERPA. And we want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. So that's the reason why, and again, I think it should be a statutory change. Outside vendors that are an integral part of school safety and security, your mental health professionals that are contracted out, outside vendors, companies such as yours that are providing SSO guardian coverage at schools, they need to be aware of what's going on with students of concern.
Because we are a team.
Right.
We are the
But
ones
they are not considered district employees and therefore
Correct.
cannot receive the training
true.
from the district. So there should be some sort of mechanism in place where they can receive the training just to be situationally aware of what's going on with particular students of concern at the school that they're covering.
It's common sense.
Yes, without violating FERPA.
Absolutely.
So that's the reason I think those two changes are big, standardization and the threat assessment component, because the threat assessment is part of the preventative strategies that schools need. Because once something happens, again, it's about mitigation at that point.
Correct.
But you want to be able to be part of the prevention process as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is something that we take by heart. This is something we actually train all our personnel in. And let me ask you another thing, and this is more important. How far you think it will take for the federal government to figure it out that this should be a national mandate, a federal funded mandate, and probably, as we were discussing prior to the program, something handled by Homeland Security?
I would think that it's going to be relatively quick because I think now with Homeland Security, they took steps in the right direction with the standard reunification method and partnering with organizations like the I Love You Guys Foundation. Mm-hmm. But I think what they need to do is that the federal government, like Homeland Security, agencies like that are going to recognize, and they already know. Florida's again, sort of first in the nation. Florida is the first state in the nation that has mandated best practices such as locked classroom doors and safe spaces and making them statutory as opposed to just a best practice standard.
Absolutely.
So they know that, and if they're going to go anywhere, it's going to go to Florida and basically say, okay, what do you recommend in terms of, as I said, mandating this kind of standardization nationwide? Now, are there going to be some states that push back? Of course. But if you have an overreaching national standard, there's no reason then that you can't allow individual states and individual districts to sort of allow their own measures of policy that are reflective of what local needs and resources are, because everything's going to be different, right? There's a big difference between, the resources of the third largest school district in the country, Miami-Dade,
the federal
360,000, as opposed to, a small district way up north that has 10,000 students. So it's going to be different, but you can still have one national mandate. And I think Homeland Security makes sense doing that, because especially if the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, if that starts getting dismantled or its functions start getting dismantled to the individual states, you can still have Homeland Security oversee the school security piece.
Correct.
And mandate it out through organizations such as FLETC, because that would be where the training mechanisms would be.
Correct, because we want to certify, and that's homogeneity on that training, number one. And number two, there's have to be this entity that have access to their fingerprints, psychological evaluation, drug screening, and keep a watch on them. They have to requalify, they have to train.
Well, listen, there's already been moves in that direction when it comes to certain items of school safety. Perfect example, the new harm prevention threat management model that the state of Florida uses.
Correct.
When the committee had it ready to go, before it moved it to the MSD committee for review, it sent it to the National Threat Assessment Center at the Secret Service so they can review it and edit it. So because they do a lot on school safety, because they were the first that did it after Columbine. So they have their National Threat Assessment Center, and they basically review the model. Well, Secret Service is what? They fall under the DHS umbrella.
Correct.
So there's already means in place that sort of allow for the federal government to put their 2 cents in when it comes to school safety. Threat assessment is one of those. And there's no reason to say that school coverage couldn't be another one. And now they're doing it with like COPS grants and things like that.
Correct.
But that's a totally different animal. We're talking about taking, I think they'd be better suited to take the money from the COPS grants that they're sending out for hardening and just create a national standard for SSOs.
Correct.
And a training program that surrounds that.
Absolutely. And the question is that we don't have enough law enforcement officers. And we don't have enough cops to cover every single school.
Right.
That's a reality.
There's a shortage. Exactly.
Even to cover right now the cities, we have a shortage. So.
Absolutely. And you see it here. I mean, there's still some sheriff's offices that even with shortages are still kind of adamant about saying, no, we will cover every single school.
It's a control issue.
It is. But I think that they need to kind of recognize, and we've seen that, like, for example, with some sheriff's offices in the state, and I'm not going to mention any, that have still reached out to you to say, well, we would like to have you for backfill coverage.
Absolutely.
So if I can't send a deputy because I'm shorthanded,
we can send dynamic.
We can send an SSO from your, to cover. So there are a few where that's going on. And that's a step in the right direction. But more sheriff's offices need to recognize the limitations they have in terms of resources because they simply don't have the manpower, and just say, hey, there's enough able-bodied people here in the SSO program that we can draw upon. And if anything, they're better trained. I mean, the standards for SSOs for things like firearms qualification are higher than most sheriff's offices.
Correct.
So you're not getting somebody who, is not,
it's not a male cop or something.
Yeah, it's not somebody who's, has no sort of skills. They have highly skilled personnel, usually with military and or law enforcement backgrounds.
And that's something that most companies, including ours, and I will say that we only hire through our veterans and retired law enforcement. And there is a reason for that, because the qualification with the sheriff are so stringent, so high, and the washout rate is just too big.
Right. And you can even again partner with outside of Homeland Security with the Department of Defense, with Veterans Affairs, for all those people that are retiring on the job, to say, here's something that you can look for post-retirement that will allow you to still kind of engage in
absolutely
functions that you're familiar with.
Absolutely.
So it makes sense.
Now, last question, and I really appreciate your time. Every time I go to a TV show or a radio show, they ask me always the same question. What do you recommend parents? What measures parents should take to help mitigate the risk of an active shooter in the school?
Well, I think the biggest thing that parents have to do is they have to be part of the process. Because what a lot of parents, in the last few years, we've seen all these news stories come out about parents being upset about schools not relaying information to them about what they're being taught in school. Oh, and or parents that are upset about, oh, you're doing this and you're teaching this stuff, and I want to be a part of it, and we don't think you should teach this or these books, or and parents are screaming at all these school board meetings about, I want to be informed, I want to be informed. And so when I train out threat assessment, I always tell parents, I always tell schools rather to tell parents, hey, listen, it's a two-way street. We need you. I know it's kind of counterintuitive to the idea of nurturing and your child, but if your child is undergoing problems and you see that there's something going on and you want to alert the school of, hey, I need, my son or my daughter is having these issues. They feel like they're being bullied, right? And that might lead to thoughts of ideation, right? They'll fantasize about
Absolutely.
committing violence against or self-harm or any of that. Well, parents need to be involved. Parents right now are not willing to share that negative information on their children because they want to protect their children with the school. But the only way that we can help your child, and this is what I always tell schools when I train this out, is I said, if your school is conducting a threat assessment on a particular child of student of concern, and there needs to be a student support management plan put in place, bring that parent in and give them the opportunity to say, listen, we need you to help us with your child because we want what's best for them. Absolutely. And so if that means counseling, if that means, restorative chats, if that means, random daily bag searches, we want you to be okay with that. But we need you to help us because only you can let us know if that child is getting better. And if you have parents that are like, well, I can't afford counseling, there's all kinds of mobile crises centers and help Absolutely. That every district has that are a matter of public funding and resources that you can help these parents that might not have the means or feel that they don't have the means to help their children. And so I try to tell schools all the time, you have to get parents involved. It's the simple mechanism that sort of become redundant now, the see something, say something.
Absolutely.
Parents, you know your children better than anybody. And you will know if a child who is normally extroverted and happy and gregarious is now suddenly introverted and sullen. What's going on? Maybe you should help us. What's going on? Is there something on social media that has affected this child? Is there something that they've seen? Is there something they're concerned about? Don't be afraid to reach out to the school and say, I have concerns about my child.
And talk to your child.
And realize that your children are spending more time in the school environment than they are at home. So they're going to be there. And the number one concern, poll after poll, nationally in the United States, regardless of where the child goes, whether it's the most privileged elite private school or a very hard, inner city school with thousands of students, is school safety. Not academics, school safety always polls number one nationally in every single poll. So we need parents to be involved, not just say, I'm worried about my kid. Okay, well, let us know what's going on with your child.
And get the right information.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we wrote in the Line of Fire is because we want to educate parents and educators, because we have this all the time that they rely on social media for their information gathering. Mm-hmm. They rely sometimes in national TV and unfortunately, sometimes you have these quote-unquote experts, and it's baffling because they start giving all kinds of explanations. In school safety, there's no a single solution that is going to cure the problem. It's going to solve this. This is a holistic approach. Mm-hmm. You have to be I got people telling me, what about if we put bulletproof doors and bulletproof glass, and that's going to be the solution? That's not the solution, because the door is not going to prevent an active shooter. It's going to contain.
Right. It's the same thing with cameras. Oh, we need more cameras. Well, a camera's just going to capture the carnage.
It's not going to tell us what happened after.
Yeah, you're going to be able to see what happened afterwards. Yeah,
it's a black box of a plane.
Exactly.
And I like to compare this, and I tell that to our viewers. If tomorrow, God forbid, I'm diagnosed with cancer, and the doctor tells me you have to do surgery, chemotherapy, and radiotherapy. Also, you're going to do only one because you don't believe in the other two? You're probably going to do everything because you want to live.
Sure.
It's the same thing. Yeah. We need to do every tool in the toolkit box. Yeah. We need to use it because we are protecting lives.
Yes.
And nothing is gonna pay that. There's no insurance in the world that's gonna pay for a second of the life of anybody.
Right.
And those kids on that school are our kids. I keep saying that to our employees. I am a parent. When I am protecting a school, I will die for my kids, and I will kill for my kids. When I'm protecting a school, those kids are my kids, and nobody messes with my kids. And that's the attitude that we have to have with law enforcement, as an SSO, as a guardian, as a teacher. Those kids are at your care. There's somebody else's kid. But at that moment, in that classroom, in that school, those are your kids. Thank you very much for coming today, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. It is an honor and a pleasure working with you, and hope in the future we can improve the security in not only in the state of Florida, but nationwide. Thank you for coming, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
School Safety Talks.